Hi, everybody, and welcome to the I Don't Know With episode of Eureka, the Insights podcast, because we're finally getting near the double digit numbers. And today we have a guest with us who was one of our earliest acquaintances in the space of market research and instrumental to us debuting at the MRSI. We have with us today Sunder Muthuraman. He is essentially an analytics person, and that has manifested in his multiple roles that he's held over the years. One of the most prominent for me being his Global Chief Client Officer of the Analytics Practice role at Kantar. But he's also been with Game Theory, he's been with Meritus Analytics, he's been with GroupM, and now he's self employed and essentially lending his expertise in analytics across multiple organizations, both in India, Southeast Asia, and in many other areas. Sundar, please do introduce yourself to our viewers and do tell them a little bit about how you came to be where you are today and walk us through your journey so far.
Thanks for the introduction, Ritu. Just before you started the recording, you said I worked for a very long time. It definitely seems that way. So just briefly, I started off in the advertising, media planning context and community, and it always intrigued and interested me to figure out why we are spending so much money, what is the kind of impact that a brand achieves, and these are the questions that led me to work with teams within the organizations that the first organization you mentioned, I don't think you mentioned that it's Ogilvy. So there were a bunch of people who were always tinkering around and asking these questions. So that's how I got introduced into the analytics space. So that led to, creating and forming teams that primarily focused on answering these questions. And then that perhaps is a much longer journey in a career sense as against advertising, answering questions with analytics. So that's really the brief introduction. The idea was and continues to be to help customers make sense of data and make it useful for their business decisions.
I think that's a beautiful summation of the roles that you've played in your different organizations. But at the risk of sounding a little offensive, the typical view of analytics is that it's boring. But I'm assuming since you've spent almost 30 years in it, there is something very, very exciting about finding out how pieces of different puzzles interact together and how the impact of one has an impact on the other. Tell me what you find most exciting about your play in analytics. What really wakes you up when you go to work? What is your reason for going to work in analytics?
I think, I guess you want to provoke and say boring. Yeah, but perhaps sometimes it is. Most workspaces, irrespective of what you do, tends to be 80% of the same and 20%, of new things or exciting things that you want to change and drive. Right? That's if it wasn't the case, then nobody would have a business. You can't keep discovering new things every day. I think but that said, at least I'm thankful and I've perhaps been part of analytics at a time when things, whether I liked it or not, changed every 2-3 years. So at some time it is the context of available data. At some other times it has been how you analyze the data, and then there has been a whole context of how you report information and data and how people can interact with it. There was a whole bunch of technologies that came by, and if you couldn't do anything there, then you perhaps didn't have a play in analytics space, right? And the same thing happened with the tools that you use for analytics. There was a time where there were monolithic, very large players where you paid a lot of money to just subscribe to a platform that would help you do the analytics. And then, the whole open era happened. So open source analytical tools appeared. So I think the exciting part, if you may, is the pace of change that happened in this space. It's not change for change's sake, and what it enabled us to do. I think that really is what I would say. What gets me to continue to be in this space and say, ask the question, saying, what should I do next? I think that really is the key. And like yourself, for example, you were trying to use current technology, which is machine learning. Give it whatever name that you want, call it AI. Perhaps we are not there yet truly. But I think it's transformative again. Things that took perhaps ages. I mean, if not, I mean, ages is a very open time frame. But let's say what took weeks now takes days, and what you could never do, you can do today, right? So I think that really is the exciting part. And analytics, if viewed with the lens of saying how do we enable data flow information to get us to a point where we can actually use it to make decisions, without getting into, I mean, the user. I mean, if you, okay, let me rephrase, right? If you look of the ecosystem, there is data and there is somebody or some system that has to analyze that information, and then there is an end user, right? I think the opportunity always has been to make sure that the end user, with the least friction, least amount of time, least effort, gets to a point where he or she can make use of that insight from that data, right? So I think that really is the key. And if you can do that, obviously you will have a business. Obviously you will be able to grow very well, right? I think that I think is in another way what excites me about this space.
Lovely. Tell me one thing. One of the common misconceptions about the market research industry is that though it's a massive industry, not just in terms of scale, but globally, geographically, in any way that counts. The impression of it is that it's still fairly traditional and very services oriented in nature. Would you agree with that view, or is the penetration of tools and technology significantly in the last decade? Has it changed the way research is conducted, or are we still waiting for that tipping point into the usage of technology?
Yeah, I think I see it very differently. It's not the industry per se, right? Because when you say the industry, then you're trying to kind of put things in a box and say, all these belong to this industry, right? But if you look at us, if you say insights as an industry, I think MR to me is a subset of that. Now, if you say, MR was, traditionally looked at as people who enable data collection and summarization and some analytics and some insights delivery, then I think we are really taking a narrow view. So if you use the word traditional, if it was about data collection using whatever forms and instruments, then perhaps you're right? But even there, if you say things haven't changed, I would disagree, right? Because the method of data collection moved from pen and paper to, touch screens and, like, perhaps before that using telephones. So I think change is constant. I think the ability to adapt and use those tools and technologies available to you at different points in time as an organization is different. So some organizations do it fast, some organizations take time, and then there are some, who are, obviously disrupting people who are not wanting to change. So I think this is a constant wherever you go. So I wouldn't want to say, MR is traditional, but I think, what I would, perhaps, call it out as a context where there has been a constant redefinition of what insights and insights delivery mean. And if you encompass the ecosystem that's doing that, I don't think it's traditional at all. I mean, be it you guys at Lightbulb or several others have always been, wanting to disrupt and change. And, it's not prevented you from doing it and saying, oh, no, MR is traditional, I don't want to do it, right? You see the opportunity, you think change can happen. And obviously, change happens in small specific areas, and then, it's a spark that kind of builds up and becomes, the leading light across the organization. So I think that's really what it is. So yes, if somebody you encounter is taking time to change, it's just that. It's and that's also sometimes, if it's a business, it is also dependent on what your business was. Now you can't overnight say, if you are in the railway business and overnight you can't say, I'm in the business of moving passengers and say from tomorrow I'll stop the trains and I will start flying people. So that is part of the reason. So there are businesses that take time to change because that's how their business is structured and that's how the organization is defined, and that change will take time. That's really how I would put it.
Absolutely. I think you've answered partially the next question I had in mind, which was about what you feel is the most commonly misunderstood aspect or thing about the insights of the research industry? And I think you've pretty much answered that. But is there anything else that comes to mind when you meet people from outside the insights industry? Is there a common misunderstanding that you've encountered over the years that struck you as being a little interesting?
I mean, the common thing that you hear is you're creating data when it does not exist. So MR, then gets looked upon as a bunch of people who will go with a, questionnaire or a suitable instrument and then come back and give you the data and information and insight that you did not have. That perhaps is, I would say the primary image that you hear of when people describe MR. And so to answer your question, yes, that is the image that everybody speaks of. But I think the big shifts that have happened, or actually the additions of ingredients or players that now form the MR industry, is significantly larger than what it was. So I guess, I mean, you mentioned the MRSI earlier on when you introduced me. I think part of the job for each of us, whether it's you, me, or the MRSI, is to kind of drive, you know, a notion of change and say MR is a lot of things. Right? It is about collecting information. It is about actually collating this data. It's about analyzing it in different ways. And perhaps we are not just restricted to consumer research. I mean, if you especially look at India, a lot of um research or where the money was spent was consumer focused, right? Yeah, you did product research, you did political, community research and all that, but they were still smaller slices of business. So in a way, the equation is that, research is more consumer centric and consumer goods companies do it. Yeah, maybe in terms of what are the large businesses and who's spending money in this space, that could be true. But I think this industry is far more larger and far bigger. It's technology, it is services, it is consulting. I think there are all facets.
Absolutely. Tell me, Sundar, how you think, I know you've spoken about how you feel the industry changes at its own pace and doesn't obviously change for the sake of change, but whenever there is a requirement and tools and technology are available, then they go ahead and adopt it. Where do you feel technology has really entered and transformed some aspects of the insights industry? Where has technology really moved the needle in your years of engaging with some of the largest organizations? Where have you seen the maximum impact that technology has been able to make?
I think there are two things, at least if I look at the recent past, technology has always been, changing the way we work. But if you look at the recent past, I would say there are three specific areas. Right? One is speed to outcome. That I think has changed dramatically. The second is, I think the triangulation using data from various sources, right? Earlier, the emphasis was on primary data when collected. I think, it's rapidly shifted to not just primary data, or some cases, even no primary data, but a lot of triangulation from transactional data, any other form of consumer interaction data, consumer customer experience data, a lot of information or data that existed within companies are coming together to kind of drive that insights, right? And the third is, I think, people are waking up to the fact that there could be a trade-off between what I would call as decimal point precision engineering accuracy. That was the notion, but it never was. Versus, can I get this thing faster, and can I be 90% right on the big things, and can I move on and can I act on it fast? So it's if you start with speed, it's obviously partly driven by this need that I mentioned last. And because you want things faster, now you're saying, can I not wait for and meet, 1,000 people or even a, interview of 50 people or do research, and, can I get to conclusions? And then they're saying, can I use other data and information? I think that is a fundamental shift. And it's and I don't think there was ever a point where all this data wasn't used, right? But I think the context of speed and the technology that's enabling it and how you can do it is shifting dramatically towards using information that you already have. That could be the crux to driving all these three things.
So it sounds very much now like the startup world. Move fast, break things, and fail fast.
Well,
I remember.
I guess thanks to the startup which disrupted that, everybody is waking up to this reality, right? I mean, there was a time when you said, oh, you want to set up this business, it's going to be whatever number of years before you get there. But there are people doing it in perhaps whatever 12, 18 months, and then you're a viable business, you're scaling up fast. There obviously is the changing mindsets, and obviously you have to survive, you have to grow.
Absolutely. Now, moving away from the industry, and we've been speaking macro, I'd like to go a little micro on your experiences. What in the last, say, couple of years have been the biggest problems that you've been working on? What are the problems in analytics that you feel are really moving the needle for you that you're zeroing in on?
Right. Right. I mean, I'm just wearing the service provider hat, right? I think there's one problem that's been constant all through, I would say analytical service delivery by my team. It's always about data being available in the, right frequency, right cadence, right granularity, and sometimes even in fact to the granularity that the clients claim that they have this data, but you then end up figuring out that there are gaps for various reasons, not to fault anybody. So I think this whole context of despite me speaking and addressing your earlier question and saying it is all about using information and data, the biggest challenge continues to be harnessing this information, ordering it in a way that can be useful for any analytical or research process. But that continues and tends to be a large space of need, and also continuing utility for, you said startups or anybody. Just fixing that problem is a massive one, right? At the other end is consumption of insights, right? So this whole context of something I learned about a year ago and I continue to use it. That's true for something very fundamental, but a lot of research tends to be for tactical purposes. Can I use A versus B? Message A, message B, content A, content B, pack A, pack B. It's typically making a choice which is more tactical than fundamental shift to saying, what is this brand's blueprint, or what is purpose. Those are questions that don't change dramatically, right? But how you manifest it, how you bring it in front of customers, how customers interact with the brand, they're all, I would say, in the tactical space. So so how do you it's always been a challenge to inform tactics on a continuous basis from an insights perspective, right? Tactics from a marcom or a media decisioning perspective, I think thanks to what we today call performance marketing, is largely in play. But from an inciting perspective, how these bits add up to the whole, which is the brand, because it is a sum total of all experiences a customer has or a bunch of customers have, and that's really why the brand will live and grow. I think is a space where we've always had problems. How do you give this on a continuous basis to the end user? Because it's dependent on the data, dependent on what you can do with it, and also equally importantly, how do you deliver this? How do you go beyond PowerPoints and static views and say, that something here is dynamic and, you can learn from it and change it? I think these two, I would just say, as aspects that continue to intrigue me, continue to, I guess, intrigue people like you, because that's really, some parts of it is what you're enabling as a light bulb is. I think that's my long answer to your very short question.
No, but I think it makes a lot of sense. In my brand avatar some years ago, I did feel that we were constantly very, very tactical in our nature versus looking at decisions that could inform those tactics on a long term basis. And we
Right.
never really took into account the fact that every time you move tactically, there is a rub off on your overall brand presence, attributes, associations. So, how do you maintain the sanity of the brand purpose throughout your tactical work without, getting led by what is having the maximum impact? Very often the maximum impact a brand can make is by being different from what has it has done before. but that
Right.
sometimes really impacts the way that your brand gets expressed, and then you move away from the core of the brand. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really a bit of a conundrum that a lot of brands, sometimes resolve successfully and sometimes don't. So I totally caught into where you were coming from.
Sure.
My next question is kind of linked, kind of not. Is in these spaces or in others, where then do you see the next big innovation that's possible for technology? Where do you really think technology will step in and help change things?
Well, that's always a difficult question to answer, right? Because there's several, I would say, transformative contexts that we see around us today, right? And obviously, the big one is centered around how machines can get closer to, uh, I would say, digesting information and representing it in a usable form without, uh, an expert needing to be there. I think that is a big shift, right? And we are also seeing contexts where, it's like a child learning. So these large language models are, perhaps new lingo is hallucination, right? So you're getting something that you ought not to be. And that in itself is interesting in some ways. It's like mind mapping, and you're doing an ideation session and you want to generate new ideas, right? So I think it's technology will touch a large number of processes, no doubt. But I think it is also going to kind of touch things that we thought it would never do, right? Like the stuff I just spoke of. Hallucination in itself is not bad, right? If it's going to lead to new thinking, new ideas, and to me that is a hugely useful, unexpected outcome of how technology can help us make decisions. Right? Because we talk of diversity, we talk of saying you need to get different ideas on the table before you take decisions, and that's because everybody's life experiences are different, and therefore you will get something far better than just you yourself sitting in a dark room meditating on it and coming to some conclusion, right? So I think the big change or the shift that I'm going to see, or I'm hoping to see, is how ideas get generated in whatever space of research or analytics that we are. I mean, it could be how data gets analyzed, right? You might say, quite simply, at a very simple level, a scatter plot is visually giving me more useful insights or directions, right? But the system may figure out a completely different way to represent that data, and then you reach to a different R, right? So I think that is what I think will excite me in the future, and which means when you're going to have a lot of these things, we need to have new skills to manage this flow and then make use of it, right? So I think that is where I think technology will make a big difference. Of course, we've already spoken about speed. We've already spoken about how a lot of data can get processed today. We've already spoken about how data can not get collected but collected because you're observing transactions or people voluntarily speaking about things in social media. So all that's true, but I think the big shift is going to happen on how ideas get generated.
I actually love what you're saying because in our we have two modules in our business, which is Insights Pro Quant and Insights Pro Qual. In Qual, with this quarter, we're introducing generative AI. And one of the
Right.
conversations I was having with our researcher just yesterday is we were analyzing a particular project using generative AI, and she was saying that the articulation of the prompt needed to generate that answer needs to be extremely specific. And I remember the
Yeah.
words that she used. She was like, it's like talking to an eighth grader. Unless you I ask them exactly what you mean, you're going to get all sorts of vague answers.
Right.
So it was quite fascinating
Right.
because technology is also coming of age. Pretty soon it'll be like talking to a 22-year-old, maybe
So
soon
yeah,
talking
you're
to a
right.
40-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Prompt engineering didn't exist a year ago, so it's a new skill.
And this is the kind of skill that regular researchers would need to develop without guardrails, more through trial and experimentation to kind of, and as you said, if you ask something that the system didn't expect or you didn't expect to ask, you may get a set of attributes and answers that you never noticed from the base data. So
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
it's very,
Yeah,
very
that's
exciting times.
exciting times. Yes, you're right. And I think the point you made about a researcher, needing to be aware that these are things that are happening around is, I think, very critical, right? And you already mentioned I worked for a huge number of years. It's so there was a time when having a computer and trying to figure out information using Excel or presenting it in PowerPoint was what was a necessary skill. If somebody wrote resume, say 30 years ago, so you have to say I can use all this. Today, if you say I know all this, I say why are you even mentioning it, right? So
Yeah.
I think what we need to be aware of to do our jobs and excel at it, has always kept changing, and it will continue to change. And I've always said this every year, we live in exciting times. And I think we are lucky, maybe my generation and yours, Ritu, is that we do live in exciting times. We do have things changing rapidly. What you didn't do a year ago, you can do today. And you're not waiting just for your organization to create it. There are a number of other people willing to step out and do it. And you can just buy it off the shelf or partner. And this whole way, I think this again, I mean, we talk of new things and what we need to be aware of. There was a time when everything had to be done within the organization. Nobody would even give you an year if you said, okay, I want to work with this guy or that. And then, everybody will say, no, no, I want to do it myself. We'll do it here. It'll become a 2-year project. I think that mindset is completely gone. Be it the most junior, researcher to, the board of management, they're saying, how can we get there fast? We spoke of speed. And speed you achieve only when you can start using learning on the job. And if you wait for perfection, it's not going to happen. Right. So I think that shift, I mean, to the point you made about researchers needing to be aware, was always true, continues to be true. It's just what we need to be aware of and what we have learned very well, because that's how we learn things, is going to be the truth. And that's where the younger
Absolutely.
generation, in any organization makes a big difference. So they're actually here to teach, not to learn. Is how you should see it.
On that note, I would like to ask you, what are the three tips or directives or even thoughts that you would perhaps like to share with the younger generation or people who are looking to build their career, who've just started off in the area of insights and market research? What are some pointers that you would like to share with them, which you've learned the hard way, which took you years of experience to distill? What could you share with them?
All right. The first thing I will say is, beyond the first few years, what you know is far less important than who you know. So, which means you need to meet people, network, and make sure that you are in the relevant context and circles, and you see, right. The second thing that I would say is about being curious, and being the change agent. Because if you don't put up your hand and say, hey, here is something that I can do differently, and it's going to make a big difference to me, my client, or whatever organization that you work for, then you're going to become the drone as against somebody who can actually be the creative genius in changing things around, right? So I think it's important to volunteer and be the change agent. I think that's extremely critical. And the third, I think, is universally true, is trust is very difficult to build. So never lose credibility. We all screw up. I mean, I'm sure you laid it after the recording, but right? So we make mistakes, but own up to it, right? And there's nobody, that I know who has never made any mistake. That's this, you know, uh, maybe somebody claims to be, but I would not trust them, right? So I think it's important to be credible, important to own up if you make mistakes, and not repeat it. Learn from your mistakes, and build that as a principle of how you will do work. Because eventually, whether you work for a company, or as an individual like me now, people call me or will call me because they know if I call him, he will tell me what he knows. He will own up to saying, I can't do this, I'll get this done. At least I can trust him, right? I can give him this. And I think that you don't you don't get just because you sit there. It's something that people need to experience with you before you get there. So I think this is fundamental. Be curious. When you're curious, you will learn new things. Yeah, I think that would be my 3 pointers.
I think beautifully articulated, and I think that was a lovely conclusion to our conversation, because these are thoughts that I think not just the younger generation, but anyone looking to build a career or building a career can always hold on to. Be
Yeah.
curious, learn, add value. This was lovely as always. Speaking to you, Sundar, is such a pleasure, and I look forward to catching up in person soon. I know our virtual world is dominant these days, but I will make it a point to
Yes.
drop by and say hi as well. But thank you so
Look
much for
forward to.
taking time out today.
And thanks for having me over, Ritu, and wishing you the best.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Eureka by TheLightBulb.ti, the Insights Podcast.